Hi, this is Dorie Clark, and we are here with our weekly installment of Better, the interview series sponsored by Newsweek. Our guest this week is Rob Walker. He is an author and a journalist, and his most recent book is called The Art of Noticing. Rob, it's great to have you here.
Dorie, I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. What a pleasure. And it's great to have you here, especially because one of the things that certainly I've seen, and I imagine you have as well, is that during COVID, all of us, not really leaving our houses, spent so much time in front of screens, so much time immersed in these artificial environments. And I think the art of noticing may have been something that perhaps we lost a little bit of touch with. Can you talk a little bit about your motivation in writing the book and how people who are perhaps just starting to reemerge from seclusion can get a little better at this?
Sure. So the book came about obviously like kind of in a different world almost, the pre-COVID world. But even then, you know what the problem is. The problem was this exact issue you just mentioned that was really exacerbated by the COVID world, which was too much screen time, too much, people fighting for your attention, trying to steal your attention. And we kind of all knew that problem. And I was originally writing a book that was sort of about the problem, that was about the war for your attention. And then at the end, it would have 10 pages of here's what you can do to fight back. And then I finally realized that I didn't really want to write that book. I didn't want to read that book. I was just interested in those last 10 pages because it was like, we all know the problem. I don't need to tell you. You don't need me showing up and saying like, hey, you know what? There's a lot of people fighting for your attention through screens and et cetera. So it became, like if you picture that sort of those 10 pages of bullet points at the end of a book, is like, let's make that the whole book. So the whole thing is prompts and exercises and games and fun things to do and challenges to get out of the house, get out. So this became, in some ways, this kind of structure became a problem when the COVID era kicked in because the book was so much about how we interact with the world and seeing and traveling and exploring and whatnot. And then we were all locked down, but there's a lot in the book that's more introspective. So I ended up getting kind of a different audience as a result through the newsletter. There's a related newsletter that we had to pivot. And now, so we're coming into this third phase, which is kind of a hybrid. And, we are reemerging again and we're learning to explore again. And I think we're learning to appreciate more. There's a sense of wonder and novelty with just being able to do some basic things that I think is going to prove to be good for us in the long run. There are a lot of challenges, but I think there's going to be some good things that will come out of this transition period.
Amen to that. That's great. We're here with Rob Walker. He's the author of the new book, The Art of Noticing. And if you are joining us and tuning in, please let us know where you're calling from. Calling being metaphorical, of course. Type into the chat box. Let us know who you are and where you're from. And if you have questions for Rob Walker, we'd love to take them. So, Rob, one of the things that I'm interested in here. So, your book, The Art of Noticing, the subtitle here is 131 ways to spark creativity, find inspiration, and discover joy in the everyday, which sounds awfully promising. Can you give us a couple of examples? What are specifically some of the things that we can do in order to spark creativity?
Well, there are a couple that I can mention. One of the favorite ones that sort of got the book underway is what I call the sort of the one object scavenger hunt, which is to just look for one thing over and over. And it could be, this is a very simple entry level thing. It could be to take a color walk and just look for the color blue everywhere you go. Or it could be the story that I tell. This is a kind of an origin story for the book. I was on a trip once to San Francisco, a city I'd been to a number of times. So I was kind of familiar with it. So I was no longer going to be in that wide-eyed tourist mode. But at the same time, I had a lot to do, so I didn't really have time to do any planned sightseeing. And I just decided to give myself this assignment of like, everywhere I go, I'm going to look for one thing, and it's going to be the security camera, which was kind of an arbitrary decision. I wasn't writing a story about it or anything, but it was just it was something no one wanted me to look at. That was my important criteria. And it was really ended up being eye-opening. And I was taking pictures of security cameras everywhere I went. and the difference between the ones that kind of are want to be seen and the ones that are kind of hidden away, and the different styles and all this kind of stuff. And I did end up writing some things about security camera design, but at the end of that trip, I was at the airport and noticing these kind of things change the way you look at the world. So all I could see at the airport were this incredible banks of security cameras, and I was on the phone with my wife telling her about it, and she said, could you just do me a favor and please don't walk around the airport taking pictures of all the security cameras. She was right about that. Another quick one that I give to people, that's like some real easy ones. One is, as just a rule, as we socialize more often, when you're visiting someone or visiting a restaurant or a place, I recommend look for the strangest thing in the room and ask about it. And this is especially true if you're visiting a friend, because people will have on their mantle, they'll have like a beautiful vase and some things that have obvious meaning, and then something that's really strange. And like, what is that? And that's where you'll get the best story. The third one I'll mention real quick, one that people like a lot of these are sort of childlike ideas. And a favorite one is the big box anthropologist. So the next time you go to like a Walmart, which is like, no one wants to go to, or any big box store, it's always a tedious task. But I always say, in addition to whatever it is that you're doing, give yourself the assignment of looking out for the weirdest, most inexplicable product that you can spot. And the last time I went to Walmart, the thing that I spotted was Pop-Tarts cereal. So who knew?
That is both fascinating and slightly horrifying. So thank you for bringing that to our attention, Rob.
I mentioned that some people are really interested when I bring it up, which I find unnerving. But I think you have the right reaction, which is no, that's disturbing. That's not good.
Yes.
Not a good thing.
Yeah. Perhaps not nutritionally. We're here with Rob Walker. He is the author of The Art of Noticing, which we have learned is also apparently a guide to learning to notice security cameras and become a potential cat burglar. So many great possibilities here. We have lots of great folks tuning in. We have Carlos from Colombia. We have Shruti. We have Rita from New York from the Science House. Hi, Rita. We have Susanna from Toronto. We have a LinkedIn user from Abu Dhabi. We have Danny from Lake Station, Indiana, Todd from New York City. We're so glad to have all of you guys and more. And if you have questions for Rob Walker, author and journalist, please feel free to type your questions into the chat box. We're here talking about noticing, about curiosity, and about identifying security cameras. So there's lots to discuss. Now, Rob, I know you have you're one of the many journalists that has of late created a paid Substack newsletter, which I think is an interesting phenomenon, and it's really great. I've been diving into it. And for readers of your newsletter, you have an upcoming webinar that you're doing, and you call it "How to Be More Curious and the Payoffs of Paying Attention." Now, obviously, you're doing a full webinar, so there's a lot that you are going to say about this, but give us a little bit of a preview. When we talk about curiosity, how does that factor into this? And I would tend to think that maybe just some people are more curious than others, but I'm willing to bet that you are going to Carol Dweck me and say, no, this is not a fixed state. So what can we do about this, Rob?
Yeah, well, I mean, when I wrote the book, curiosity was not a front and center subject, but I think that noticing and attention and paying attention to things that no one wants you to pay attention to is kind of at the core of curiosity. And I think more important is both of these things are at the core of innovation and invention, right? And this is a recurring lesson of the book, that all creativity starts with noticing something that someone else overlooked, or that everyone else overlooked. Like there's no such thing. That's how you become an entrepreneur. You start a business that fills a need that wasn't being met. How do you do that? You notice it. I think that everyone agrees, it's very difficult to find someone who's sort of against curiosity or who says, overtly. But on the other hand, there's such an emphasis on, as you know, on productivity and kind of measurable productivity. And it's very difficult to measure curiosity and the payoffs of curiosity. So therefore, a lot of people in their studies on this, that just, they don't feel that their managers, it doesn't feel reinforced. It doesn't feel encouraged. It doesn't feel rewarded to just be curious and to sort of go down the rabbit hole of asking questions that other people missed. But that's how, you know, the one of the examples I give of this is the guy who invented, I'm going to space out on his name, but the guy who invented Velcro, that sort of came about through him noticing these burrs and the way they stuck together and just sort of thinking, what are the implications of that and how can we, so that's the payoff of curiosity. I believe, I'm not going to drop any sort of statistics on you or whatever, but I definitely believe that people are naturally curious. I think that they can be more curious if they are encouraged. And ultimately, I have to say, like, you don't need permission. You got to give yourself permission to be curious and to pursue things that no one necessarily wants you to pursue, but because they interest you. And if it interests you, positive or negative, and this could be there's an opportunity here or there's a problem here. One of the exercises in the book is find something to complain about, which seems like a terrible thing to say. But this is how problems get solved, is that you recognize, instead of just accepting the pothole or the, you know, large or small problem, you really dwell on it and say, like, well, why is no one else, everyone has just come to accept this. Can't this be fixed? And that's the beginning of innovation.
I think that's really powerful. And I think I like where you're going with this, Rob, that sometimes we have to ask what I'll say in air quotes might be perceived as negative questions. I was actually on the phone with a consulting, or coaching client this morning, and he has been working to try to identify what direction he wants to go in his professional life and where his energies are. And I told him that a great question to ask himself is, who are you jealous of? And we often would, stay away from that. Oh, I'm not jealous of anyone. Jealousy is terrible. But actually, if we can harness that and channel it and say, no, actually, there's people that, I wish I had their career. I would love to be doing what they're doing. Those are some important hints that we can follow. They're a trail of breadcrumbs. So I like where you're going with this, find something to complain about.
Yeah. And it does sound negative, but you can't solve a problem without identifying it. And that should be encouraged as a thing to, so it's not all about negativity. And sometimes it's also about things that just need to be explained. This is when I deal with students. I think like find something that needs to be praised that no one's praising, find something that's complained about. That needs to be complained about, and find something that just needs an explanation. Like, instead of glossing over the stuff that you walk by or that you hear or that you smell, tune into that and explore it and see what you're curious about, and go with that and see where it leads you.
Fantastic. So we are here with Rob Walker. If you want to learn more about him and get tuned into everything he's doing, go to robwalker.net. And his newest book is The Art of Noticing. And if you want to make sure that you never miss one of our weekly Newsweek interview series, go to my website, dorieclark.com. You can sign up for a free self-assessment, and that will get you on my email list, so you will get notices and reminders about these fantastic conversations. So, Rob, we have some fans in the house here. We have Corrado, who's here from Ontario, and says, "Love you, Rob."
Oh, that's sweet.
So nice. And Rita says, "I thought this was going to be a nice break in the day. Meanwhile, the truth is I'm taking notes the whole time." So thank you, Rita. That's fantastic.
Hi, Rita.
So a great question came in, Rob, from Susanna. And she wanted to know, how has your life changed or improved since writing the book? I know for a lot of authors, they often write the book that they need. I'm curious, was this a process of wanting to help you become better at noticing? And how have you changed your behavior since starting this process?
Yeah, I was just thinking about this issue this morning, because that is a thing that people say, that you write the book that you wish that you could have read, and that was definitely true. And I guess I sort of told the anecdote that I mentioned earlier, that it was a big breakthrough for me to realize that the book I wanted to write was the last 10 pages of the book that I was sort of spending 2 years not writing. But But this is, I mean, I guess that I felt there's two things I would say about this, and they're kind of related, and some of it's related to the teaching. Like as an individual, I did feel like there was not a lot of validation for this way of looking at the world, and of I do understand why people at companies feel that curiosity is not necessarily encouraged, and I had a conversation in the course of doing the book. I talked to a lot of people and got ideas, including Rita was actually one of the people who gave me some great feedback and ideas for the book. But there were other people I talked to who sort of didn't get what I was doing. And I remember talking to one person who was a fairly well-known productivity expert, and I was trying to get out of him a tip. And you know, like, what do you do? And I said, as an example, I said, like, let's say you're going to be in Cincinnati on a business thing, but you're going to have a half a day free. What do you do? How do you decide what to do? And he said, well, I stay in my hotel room and answer email because I don't care about Cincinnati. And so, first of all, no offense to the Cincinnati, but I didn't say that. But second, I was like, that's so depressing. Like all the more reason to explore Cincinnati, that you don't have any. It's like, go be surprised. Who knows what you'll discover? Figure out. So I wanted to do something, and I feel like if the book achieved nothing else, it's at least there's this a counter argument now to be made. And the second piece of that puzzle is from teaching, is that this was a big influence on the book. I started teaching 6 or 7 years ago, just very occasionally, like basically one class a year at the School of Visual Arts, the Products of Design program, a class called Point of View. And it's about it's helping designers figure out, you know, what their work is, how to talk about their work and what their work is about and why they want to do the work they're doing. And there was often a kind of reluctance to, you know, it often felt like the things that they wanted to say, they felt needed to be grounded in, like, let's just use shorthand, trending topics or whatever. And so if they're interested in something and no one else seemed to be interested in it, they felt like that was bad, and they needed to pick something that, you know, was popular. And I said, no, like, that's the opposite thing. The things that you notice that no one else is picking up on, that's the most important stuff. That's what makes you you. That's what makes your work stand out. That's what makes you a person. You've got to embrace that. You've got to lean into it. So getting those things out there and then connecting with people as a result of the book and the newsletter who needed to hear that has been the most rewarding part of the process.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you very much, Rob. That's great. And in fact, in November, for our regular viewers, Debbie Millman, who is the chair of one of the branding departments at SVA, the School for Visual Arts in New York City, is going to be a guest on Better, talking about her new book. So we're excited to have all of SVA come on the show. That is wonderful. Now, speaking of branding, Rob, one thing that I think is worth exploring a little bit, and I'm curious how it ties in with your focus on noticing and creativity, is that your earlier work really was largely focused on the brand world. I believe that I first actually came across your work and became a fan of yours when your book Buying In was released. The subtitle is The Secret Dialogue Between What We Buy and Who We Are. So talk a little bit about that, and about your immersion in the world of studying brands and how it connects to the work that you're focusing on now.
Sure. I was just actually talking to somebody about this the other day. The world has changed a lot since that book came out. And since I was doing at the time a column called Consumed at the New York Times Magazine, which was about consumer culture. And the premise of that column was taking consumer culture seriously, and taking things like Crocs. I was thinking about that was one of the early columns I wrote was about Crocs and, like, why do people wear Crocs? And it was kind of looking at this stuff that no one else was taking seriously and deciding that, like, and that people in fact were openly dismissive of, that they would say, like, advertising doesn't matter, branding doesn't affect me, none of it works, it's all a sideshow. And I just felt like that can't be true. And I was authentically curious about why are Crocs, you know, and at that time, so that particular column was not just about people wearing Crocs, but about people hating Crocs. and the vehemence with which they, and like, so why are people so upset? Anyway, so that kind of leaning in, and at the essence of being a journalist in a lot of ways is, obviously you can't go to your editor and pitch something that everyone else has already talked about. You have to have picked up on something that hasn't been done yet. So that was what that column was about. And I wasn't thinking in the exact terms that I'm talking about it now. Like there may be some reverse engineering going on here. But as I evolved away, as the world changed, and now people do there's plenty of stuff out there, the anthropology of Crocs kind of journalism going on nowadays. I had to move on to something else, and ended up going in this direction that we discussed, which was interest in the attention economy and interest in fighting back on the attention economy. Fighting back both on an individual level and as on the level of creative business person. Define creativity as broadly as you want, from entrepreneurial to knowledge work of almost any kind. And so that became the audience that I was interested in speaking to, and trying to get something on the table this time that was helpful. Like I really want the book to be helpful. I see it as opposed to buying in was more of a traditional big idea kind of book, which is helpful in its way. And I'm not against big idea kinds of books. But I was very explicitly looking to do something with it in a different form, that was, I don't want to say prescriptive, but, engaging, directly engaging.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, providing people with really tangible suggestions and ideas and tips is very powerful, and I think can be a prompt for a lot of people. So a great comment came in, Rob, from our friend Todd Churchis in New York. Todd is a fellow author of a book called Visual Leadership, so he's pretty into the art of noticing. He wants to know, he says, I'm trying to notice what other books are in the background on Rob's shelves. So
that's
maybe
not noticing, that's spying.
Well, important distinction. Depends if there's security cameras. But my question to you, Rob, is looking back at your shelves there. Are there, one or two books in particular that you might highlight, things that you've read either recently or are classics in the Rob Walker world that have inspired you in one way or another?
Well, obviously, what's embarrassing, of course, is that there's a whole shelf of just my books.
We all do it, my man. We all do.
There's one of Debbie Millman. You just mentioned Debbie. Her book, Look Both Ways, which is an excellent collection of her kind of visual essays. There's an interesting book. I've just been thinking about Jeff Manock's book, Building Blog, because he's got a new book out, he and his wife, Nicola Twilley, on quarantine. You should get them as guests. One of them. I just heard Nicola on Think on KERA. And then I guess I'll mention my friend. I do a lot. Well, On Bullshit, a classic. We all know that one. And my often collaborative partner, Josh Glenn, did this great book called Taking Things Seriously. That, what I was saying about picking the weirdest thing on the shelf, that's kind of what this book is about. It's individual essays on objects that people own whose significance you wouldn't guess. So those are a couple of quick ones. I hope that helps, Todd.
Those are great ones. Absolutely. What can we say? Inquiring minds want to know.
Sure.
So that's awesome. So now, Rob, I often on the Better Show, we often have sort of a business twist. We talk about people's professional lives, and I am curious if there are examples from the business world of either entrepreneurs or perhaps employees working within companies who have noticed something that other people haven't. Because noticing, it can be, of course, in the moment, walking around and spying all the color red. But I imagine that there are probably macro examples of being able to see things that others can't. And I'm curious if you have thoughts about that, or if there are perhaps some inspirational North Stars that you can cite in that area.
Well, the guy, and I'm sorry that I'm blanking on his name, but the Velcro inventor is one that I talk about a lot. That is just, I like that one because it's such an unlikely leap. I mean, because it was literally like burrs stuck to his pants, which is an annoyance, but just sort of approaching that with an openness that I find kind of inspiring, and a really different angle on it. It's not quite what you're asked, but it's the thing that makes me think of. Years ago, I got a chance to interview Johnny Ive, the famous designer, and he was already famous, but this was sort of 2 years after the iPod. That's what I was writing about, the iPod, and so he wasn't quite as well known as he is now, but it was long enough ago that I was using an analog tape recorder. And as we were talking, so the iPod existed at this point. So we were far enough along, but he kept looking at it. And I was like, what? And he proceeded to do this fascinating breakdown of all the decisions that the designer of this thing had made that he found questionable. About this dent, this not dent, but like indention, this hinge, how this was lining up there. So that level of attention to stuff that no mortal among us would right? Like, how much would you think? You've probably been interviewed any number, how much are you sort of evaluating? But just that, his way of seeing, I found really inspirational. And because it was like everything is worth noticing, every detail. Why is it like that? How should it be? And clearly, he was someone who put those things into practice in a million small ways. So it's not a lightning bolt moment, but it's an iterative moment that I found kind of almost like at the time he really took me aback, and it made a deep impression on me.
That is a really powerful example. Thank you for sharing that. And our faithful, intelligent listeners are chiming in and helping us out.
Oh, thank
Susanna
you.
says the Velcro inventor is Georges de Mistral.
Yes.
So thank you, Susanna,
Thank
for
you,
that.
Susanna.
Very, very much appreciated. We are here with Rob Walker. He is an author and journalist. His book is The Art of Noticing. If you'd like to learn more about Rob, his website is robwalker.net. So definitely check that out. And if you want to make sure you never miss one of our weekly Newsweek interviews, you can follow me on LinkedIn and subscribe to my LinkedIn newsletter. Just go to dorieclark.com/LI for LinkedIn. Now, Rob, we have time for just about one more question. And one thing that I am curious about is if you are an employee, you were mentioning this earlier, that obviously, unfortunately, a lot of employees feel a little bit disengaged at their job. They might not feel like their company supports creativity, doesn't really want their creative ideas. But if you are someone who is in that position, are there things that you can do that nonetheless, regardless of the external circumstances around you, that you can take control of so that you are able to spark more joy and to bring more creativity and curiosity into what you are doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that set of 3 ideas of find something to praise, find something to complain about, find something that needs to be explained. Like, kind of give yourself that assignment, maybe on a small scale, and figure out, what a way to frame it is like, what should my manager be? In an ideal world, what do I want my manager to be assigning me to do? And kind of assign it to yourself, and maybe pick small things. And you don't want to come across with like, here's my list of 10 things that the company is doing wrong. But if you come across with like, here's one thing that we're doing really well that we should be celebrating more. Here's one thing that, could be improved. And here's one thing that seems to be doing well, but we really need to ask why. That framework, and then scale it up, scale it down based on what's available to you and the situation that you're in, because obviously it depends on the specific job. And, I'm trying to be as broad as I can here. But just basically give yourself that permission. And I wrote about it in the newsletter this week, the free, which the newsletter is not all paid. It's mostly free. There is the first step of like attention and noticing things people overlooked, but then there's the second step, the curious step of like, what will happen if? and just give yourself permission to ask that question and to try to answer that question and to see where it leads you.
That's great. Thank you, Rob. What will happen if is certainly a powerful question for all of us to be asking. And again, if you've enjoyed this conversation with Rob Walker, his book is The Art of Noticing, and hit the like button and hit the share button so that your friends and colleagues can benefit from Rob's insights as well. Thank you all for tuning in. And Rob Walker, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a blast.